The New York Mets made their first major league signings of the offseason, and they added two players that are coming off terrible seasons. Why did they do that? I'll break it all down on today's edition. Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X, Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. All right, the Mets made some moves. They've made major league signings. David Stearns had a busy Wednesday night, bringing in Luis Severino and Joey Wendle. We're going to start with Severino, but I'll tell you on the front end, I don't like either of these moves. But Severino is the one I can get my head around a little bit more if I ignore the part that Mets fans were freaking out about, which was the fact that he's getting paid $13 million next season. If Luis Severino got $13 million coming off his 2022 campaign, I think everybody would have been okay with it. The guy pitched to a 3.18 ERA in 19 starts coming off Tommy John surgery, 102 innings pitched. Strikeout rate was good, 9.88 strikeouts per nine. Walk rate was solid, 2.65 walks per nine. He was a very solid major league starting pitcher. And starting pitchers are getting paid a lot in this market. But to give a guy $13 million when he just pitched to a 6.65 ERA, it's shocking. It just is. There's no way around it. The guy gave up 23 home runs and 89 in a third innings pitched. That's a home run per nine of 2.32. So to put that into context, for every 9 innings he pitched, he gives up more than 2 home runs. Brutal. The strikeouts were down. The walks were up. It's just a horrible season. Opposing hitters hit 299 against Luis Severino last year. 299. A point away from a 300 hitter. 30% of the time, guys are getting hits. It's shocking he got paid that much money. But while all of that is valid to have your concerns, why do we care about the money that Steve Cohen is spending on this team? As fans, we shouldn't. And in particular this year, I have telegraphed a lot of this if you've been listening to the show throughout the offseason. For one, earlier this week, I think it was Monday's show, I did a, when will the Mets make their first signing? And I think I said it'll be Luis Severino, if I'm not mistaken. I think I said Severino or Noah Syndergaard or a guy like that. And I also mentioned Seth Lugo. And I went back to last offseason to check the pace of free agency then. And what I said from last offseason, that's pretty much played out this week. There was a big signing on the Monday after Thanksgiving of Sonny Gray, comparable to the Jose Abreu signing, last year. And then I also said on Thursday last year, Zach Eflin signed. I bet you there's going to be a Eduardo Rodriguez or a Jordan Montgomery, one of these guys who's maybe not the top of the market, that's going to get paid tomorrow or today as you're listening to this. So I think the market's moving at the pace that we thought. And I said in that episode, it might be one of these bounce back starters, but this is just the first of many moves. To me, this doesn't say that, the Mets are only going to get one more starting pitcher. I said coming into this offseason, they needed 2 starting pitchers. Now it seems that they're going to sign 3. Because I don't think that they are looking at Severino and saying, he's our number 4. I think they're looking at Severino and saying, okay, he's going to have that first crack at the 5th starter spot. Tyler McGill, Joey Lucchesi, Jose Budo. We don't want any of those guys in our rotation. Those guys are all depth, which in some respects is the right strategy to have here. And like I alluded to, in 2022, this guy was good. So it's not like he has, no success coming off Tommy John. If the Mets signed Syndergaard, it would just be bringing back a fan favorite. but the guy has not pitched well since coming off TJ. Severino at least had one good season, and last year was a disaster, but his velocity is still in line with what he did, throughout his career. He's still throwing hard. So this is a complete reclamation project. This is David Stearns believing that with their new pitching lab and the resources that have been poured into it, with his knowledge and his staff's knowledge in that front office, they can fix this guy. And we'll see. We will see. But what you have to do on this signing to not get frustrated is you have to just flush aside the money, because the fact that Severino is making 13 and Lance Lynn's making 10, it doesn't necessarily add up. Lynn had a bad year too, but at least with Lance Lynn, you know that you're going to get, 160 innings. That might not be good innings, but he's going to pitch 160 to, even 180 to 200 innings. I mean, he is a workhorse. Severino is not. He has really struggled to stay on the mound, but Severino has upside. And I don't think the Mets are submitting a $13 million offer when he's sitting on $8 million offers in free agency. I imagine that he probably had a market where maybe he was going to get at least 10, because it seems like every viable starting pitcher is getting 10. Now, you could say Severino's not a viable starter, but he has some upside that there's probably enough teams that were still willing to buy in on. He still hasn't turned 30 yet. He'll turn 30 in February, so this will be his age 30 season. I think there is a chance that we look back on this, and while everyone's pissed off about it now, this could be one of the best signs the Mets make this offseason, because there is still a chance that Severino can get back to being the guy he was earlier in his career, or even just the guy he was in 2022. And if he's that guy, if he gives the Mets a 3.18 ERA over even just 100 innings pitched, that's going to be worth it for this team. If he ends up being a guy that is suddenly a reliever halfway through the year, because the Mets have so many starting pitchers and the stuff plays up, you never know how this signing is going to play out. This is simply a reflection of the market, in my opinion. It's a reflection of the lack of starting pitchers and the Mets' desperation to add starting pitchers. So you get a guy who's pitched in New York before. You don't have to worry about that side of the equation. On a one-year deal, so he doesn't affect you long-term. Because, again, I mentioned telegraphing this throughout the offseason. I've said this is a year where spending doesn't matter. The Mets have so much dead money on their books that they're going to blow past the luxury tax. Steve Cohen knows he is going to peg an arm and a leg and maybe an entire extra body for this team. So you might as well blow past it. He has said that before. If you're going to go through the luxury tax, blow on past it. That's what they're doing. So, this does not stop the Mets' ability from being able to reset, whether that's next year or the year prior. We're still trying to win this year. Let's get a guy who's got some upside to come in and compete with our fifth starters. And so if you're telling me right now who's got the edge going into camp between Severino, McGill, Lucchesi, and Budo, obviously it's Severino because of the contract. But also I look at the upside of Severino, and I can't say that any of those guys I just mentioned has as much upside as this guy does. Like, I would hate it if McGill, Lucchesi, Budo are starting a playoff game. I could envision a world where Severino is starting a playoff game because last year is just an aberration. It's not who he is. You flush it down, and he gets back to being the guy that has a 3.79 career ERA. So we'll see what he amounts to. I'm not that mad about this signing. I'm not, jumping for joy about it, but I'm going to trust David Stearns in his front office on this one. It's harder for me to trust David Stearns in his front office on the next one. Joey Wendle is signed to the Mets, and it'll be harder for me to justify it, but I'll try to, I guess, in the next segment. Before we do, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score this NFL season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, now is the perfect time to get in on the action. You have the NFL season, college football, you got the NBA. So every night you can find something to lay a little bit of action on and, just improve your rooting interest. If there's a game on, you don't know, what you're going to root for, you don't have a reason to tune in, go ahead, pick, whatever team it is. If it's an NBA game, if you're watching the Knicks, pick them on the money line, or maybe hedge against your happiness a little bit. Pick against them if they win. As a Knicks fan, you're happy. If they lose, you're happy. there's a wide range of betting options at FanDuel. You have the spread, player props, over-unders, and more. So if you want to visit FanDuel today, you can do so at FanDuel.com/lockedon. And remember, place that $5 money line bet. If you win that, you get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for your 24/7 coverage of all the top stories in sports with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Joey Wendle. This is a signing that I just do not understand. I'll try to give you a rationale for it, but 1 year, $2 million. Everybody saw this and said, why not just tender Luis Guillorme a contract? Because what Joey Wendle brings is a good glove in the infield. That's it. He's not a good hitter anymore. His last 2 years with the Marlins have been awful. They've been awful, particularly this past season. He hit 212, 248 on base, 306 slug, didn't even check in at a 600 OPS. His OPS was 554. He was awful. Awful. Doesn't walk a ton. Okay. His walk rate for his career is at 5.4%. Doesn't strike out a ton either. But like I look at Guillorme, his career walk rate's over 10%. It's 11.1. He strikes out less. Last year, as bad as he was still better than Joey Wendle. He had a 615 OPS at least. And that was with inconsistent playing time dealing with injuries. And he's, a year removed from 2022, where he was a really nice player for the Mets. And he got on base at a 350 clip. So, why non-tender Guillorme for Wendle? Anyone who points to the money, I just don't think that makes any sense. I don't, because I don't remember the exact arbitration figure that MLB Trade Rumors projected for Guillorme. It was either 1.7 or 2.7 million. We'll say it's 2.7, just for the sake of that argument. The Mets don't care about saving $700K. That's not what this is about. To me, the reason why Guillorme was non-tendered is because it must have been made known in the organization that this guy was not happy being constantly in a bench role. And they wanted to do him a solid. And this is just no reporting. This is, no one out here is saying it. This is just my take on why the Mets would make this decision. And then their first position player signing is a guy who's just older and pretty much serves a similar function. Like, you would imagine that there's still more upside in Guillorme's bat to be able to hit for a high average at least, get on base at a good clip, walk more, and even the athleticism, should be a little bit better than what you get from Joey Wendle. So again, if you're just looking at these players and you're comparing them head to head, to me, it's at least a wash. I can't look at the camera right now and say Joey Wendle is better than Guillorme. I also can't say that Guillorme is head and shoulders better than Wendle. I think it's about the same. So why do this? To me, it was doing Guillorme a solid. It's a guy that came up through your organization that didn't have a clear role, that has a chance as a free agent now to find a team that needs an innings eater to go play some second base, and he could go out and he could try to make a career for himself. And Joey Wendle is 34 years old, looking to still get a major league deal and play a role, and is not going to care how much you play him, and can play second, third, and short. He has played a little bit of corner outfield, but that was a long time ago. Let me go back and check the last year he's done that. I don't think it's been, he didn't do it with the Marlins. I'll tell you that much. So the last time he played outfield was 2019, played an inning. And 2018, he, made 13 starts, played 17 games in the outfield, had 113 innings. So I wouldn't even call him as a guy that you're going to stick in the outfield. It's okay. He's your backup infielder on this team. And you feel good about him defensively if he's your third baseman at times with Beatty and Mauricio, if those guys aren't hitting and you just want a better defensive option, or if you want someone to come in late in games, I guess. But I don't like this signing. I don't. Okay? I look at Joey Wendle and I say, how much better is he than Zach Short, really? I mean, Zach Short's on this roster. He's got a little more power in his bat. Look, Zach Short doesn't even have 200 games played in the big leagues. Joey Wendle He's going to reach his 650th game played in his first one with the Mets. He has a much longer track record. He is a big leaguer, but he hasn't played like a good big leaguer, at least last season. And look, I will acknowledge 2022 with the Marlins, he was a win player. 1.1 was his F4. So as a bench guy, it's not horrible. But to me, the whole thing about this is I didn't think the Mets needed to add a position player to this roster unless it was someone that was going to improve their lineup at DH or at third base or in left field. If it was an offensive upgrade, I get it. But I feel like the Mets had enough infield talent with Jeff McNeil, who could still be your starting second baseman, Pete Alonso, Lindor. Those are the guys that should be out there every day. When McNeil slides into the outfield, you have Ronnie Mauricio that can play second base. You have Brett Beatty at third. You have Mauricio that can also play third base. You have Luis Acuna on the 40-man roster, who could be up at some point next season at second base, likely, if he was to make his debut. Jet Williams, not saying he's going to be up. He's still, he'll be playing his age 20 season next year. It's unlikely, but the guy said he wants to make the big leagues next year, and the last time we heard that, it was Alvarez, and he did at the end of that year, which was 2022. So I want to look at these moves and where it puts the Mets and what else they have to do now after making them in the final segment here. But overall, I can't be too upset at a $2 million signing for a backup utility infielder that I hope if everything breaks right, he's not going to get more than 150 plate appearances, 200 plate appearances. But that's not what happens in these seasons, Injuries happen, and when whoever it is goes down, if it's Jeff McNeil, if it's Beatty, Mauricio, whatever it is, when one of these guys goes down and Joey Wendle is filling in, it's just very underwhelming to me. And I just, he's not even a guy that I would necessarily want to see rostered, honestly. But I do still have to, take a step back and say, I trust this front office. And if they think this guy will thrive in a bench role, if they think that the reason he was terrible offensively the last 2 years is because he was in Miami and they can, set him up to be a little bit better and the glove's going to be great for this team, I just have to trust them in that. But it does give me a lot of pause and question what's next, particularly when it comes to how else they're filling out this roster with their position players. And also getting back to the Severino signing, what can we see in the coming days about the rotation? So we're going to break down all of the latest, rumors that are out there, what the Mets could do and where their roster is in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. If you haven't yet, now is the perfect time to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime something breaks, anytime there's an interesting rumor. Tonight, I sent text to our insiders on Severino. Then a little bit later, I sent them one on Joey Wendle. And then I went back and forth with some of the Locked On Mets insiders, hearing them out on their frustrations, venting some of mine. It's been a lot of fun to get to know some of the everydayers a little bit better. So I appreciate all of you who subscribe. You can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, what could we see happen over the next couple days here? That the Mets are going to add another arm, and I would not be shocked if it happens soon. There's been some rumors there. Eduardo Rodriguez, the Mets have been in touch with his camp. They're very interested. Jordan Montgomery is another one. So I could see the Mets signing either of those left-handers, and they would fit that middle of the rotation role. If you're looking at the Mets rotation right now, it's Kodai Senga as their one frontline starter. Jose Quintana is their one middle of the rotation starter. Severino is now their fifth starter, and they have all these depth starters with McGill, Lucchesi, Budo behind him. Okay? You still need to add one more frontline guy and one more middle of the rotation guy. And so I look at Eduardo Rodriguez, and I think he's a middle of the rotation guy. I look at Jordan Montgomery, and he's more of a middle of the rotation guy than a frontline guy. Do I think Jordan Montgomery can be the 2 in the Mets rotation next year and they can have success? Yeah, he was just the 1 or 2 in the Rangers rotation in the playoffs and they won a World Series. But if they're going to get a frontline guy, it's Yamamoto. That's everything that we have learned up to this point. but that's going to take some time. And the Mets are not going to miss out on the opportunity to sign guys that they value on the contracts that they might get here. And who knows, maybe Montgomery, because first we heard Montgomery's name, and then now we're hearing Rodriguez's name in some of these rumors. So maybe Montgomery's price is too high, and they're looking at Erod as more of a middle ground. We'll see. That would be the next signing I could see happen. It's that tier of starter. One of those two guys, really. Now, beyond that, there's also the market for the two Japanese pitchers. And Joel Sherman had a very interesting story about David Stearns and how the Mets are approaching this offseason. And basically, he was discussing how in the past, Stearns with the Brewers had to sit on the fence between trying to contend and thinking about the future. And we're seeing that with how Milwaukee's operating now. They can't just always be in it, because then they would have to take a step back and not contend for years. So there's always that balancing act. And he mentions the Josh Hader trade in that article, how Stearns made a tough trade. It probably cost them the playoffs in 2022, but it netted them a player in Estrella Ruiz that they sent out for Contreras that they got last offseason, a big trade. William Contreras became, arguably their best hitter this past year. He was amazing for them. They got a setup man in that deal. They have one of their top prospects still from that deal. It's proven to be a really good trade. So he's had to do that balancing act, and now he's doing it again, but with all the resources in the world. And that's why you go out and you sign Severino, because why not? Why not? Upside play, 1 year, doesn't hurt your long-term flexibility. Take a shot. The Mets are viewing Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shota Imanaga as two pitchers that they would love to have in their rotation for years to come. That would satisfy not only competing this year, but competing in a larger window. So those are maybe the two pitchers they're the most aggressive on right now. Jordan Montgomery might fit into that camp as well. Maybe Eduardo Rodriguez on top of it. But the Mets are definitely all in on this starting pitching market, and I expect they add two more arms. Now we'll see how good those pitchers are. Do they hit on Yamamoto? Is it Imanaga is their number two? Do they hit on Montgomery and he's their one of their two as far as who they're adding? Or is it Eduardo Rodriguez? Or is it, when it comes to that, middle of the rotation guy, is it even a step lower? Is it Lucas Giolito? We'll find out, but the Mets are going to be aggressive, and I would not be shocked if they sign another starter before the winter meetings. Honestly, at this point, I might be a little bit surprised if they don't sign a starter before the winter meetings, because the winter meetings begin on Monday. And I think another move is going to happen here in the coming days. Now let's go back to the Joey Wendle side of the equation here. Where does that put the Mets roster right now? Let's just count them all out, right? Joey Wendle, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio. There's 6. That's your infielders. You got Nimmo, Marte, Stewart in the outfield, Alvarez, Narvaez. That brings you to 11. Those are your catchers. And then you got Mark Vientos as your DH. It's 12. I imagine the Mets are going to carry maybe 13 position players. You figure? So that would, because you're going to have maybe 8 pitchers in the bullpen, 5-man rotation, or at this rate, I would not be surprised at all if this is a 6-man rotation, particularly if they add either of the Japanese starters. I could absolutely see a 6-man rotation. So take that for what it's worth. You maybe now have room to add one more position player after bringing on Wendle. I don't know. I just don't love that signing. I don't. And because it was an infielder, because they have Mauricio and Beatty, I'm led to wonder, is it an outfielder? It's probably got to be an outfielder if they add one more player. You probably want someone else on the roster that could play center field outside of Brandon Nimmo. So who's that player going to be? And also, could the Joey Wendle signing be an indication of the Mets' willingness to move a Mauricio or a Beatty in a trade this offseason? I think that's a possibility, because he gives you some coverage at those positions that they play. And maybe you're going to move one of those guys to address your rotation. That's still something that can happen. I don't think that that's entirely why they do this. I think they did this because for whatever reason, This front office loves them some Joey Wendle. It was a cheap contract. You bring in a guy that they trust to play defense at 3 positions. I think that's all it really is. But it certainly leaves a lot to be desired on the offensive side of things. And if you want to see the Mets upgrade their offense, there's just not a lot of room there to do that other than trusting all these kids from last year to be much better next season, which absolutely can happen. But, if you're telling me who would I rather see on this team, Joey Wendle or Justin Turner, to give you some insurance over at third base if the kids don't work out, I'd rather see Justin Turner, who can be your everyday DH, or he could be your starting third baseman if those guys just don't hit. Instead, you got a guy that can play some defense. I digress on that. No reason to spend any more time on it. We'll see if there's any more news tomorrow for our last show of the week. Of course, if there's any news that happens over the weekend, I always will have you covered with a breaking news edition of Locked On Mets. But if all the rumors remain rumors and nothing happens, tomorrow's show, we're going to do a Friday Farm Report episode. I want to project what the homegrown lineup would be 2025. So, if you're just using the prospects, not entirely homegrown because we're counting Acuna and guys like that as homegrown. Regardless, what would that look like in the following season? So it should be a fun show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan, the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to become a Locked On Mets insider, you can find that link in the episode description. And also, if you're looking for 24/7 coverage of everything going on in sports, find Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. They got you covered with local experts and league-wide experts breaking down all of your sports coverage 24/7.